Welcome to Whiskey One, the channel for the novice, the curious, and the connoisseur. I'm Whiskey One, and I'm joined here today by David Kearns, the official bourbon diplomat of Maker's Mark. Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
And we got ourselves a little whiskey, of course, if we're going to do some talking.
You got to have a glass of whiskey if you're going to talk about whiskey, I think.
He actually encouraged me to drink on camera, so I'll be doing that.
Yeah, it's fair. I think it's fair.
It is.
Yeah.
So today we are at the Albuquerque Whiskey Society's official Maker's Mark event. We have you here to try out different whiskeys. It looks like there's stave profile experimentals that you guys have.
Yes.
And I guess we'll be seeing whose is everybody's favorite. But before we dive into that and get started, I would like to kind of open it up to you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your journey with Maker's Mark.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think my journey started a lot like yours did. I was in the restaurant industry. I noticed I started drinking Makers and Old Overholt. After the shift at the bar, I'd have a shot and a beer. That shot was normally Makers or Old Overholt or occasionally tequila. And I noticed whiskey, just getting into American whiskey and really kind of fell in love with it. And so this is now, this is 14, 15 years ago now. So this is before the big bubble.
The big boom, right?
Yeah. And so, of course, that was the time where you could go into the liquor store and buy all that stuff that we all struggle to get nowadays.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I expanded our whiskey selection at our restaurant. And then my wife's first pregnancy led me to ask our brand rep for Southern Wine and Spirits how he got into the business. And that's how I got in as a kind of a Beam whiskey specialist in the Seattle area.
Very cool.
And then a little over a year later, I got a job with Beam themselves. So I've been with Beam Suntory now for 10 years, and then just with Maker's Mark for almost 5 years now.
So when you started, did you start as like a diplomat?
No, I was a distillery specialist, a whiskey specialist. I had all kinds of specialist names inside of Beam Suntory. But American whiskey's always been, and whiskey really is where my heart has been. And this job has let me see the world. The only whiskey making country I haven't been to, big one, is Japan. And that's, if I don't get to Japan soon, I'm going to lose my mind, I think.
And your parent company being Suntory.
That's correct.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure that's going to happen.
It should happen. It should happen. I hope so. We'll cross my fingers. I might have to take a personal trip, but I will get there.
Well, I hope you get there soon.
Yeah.
Japan's a beautiful country, by the way.
I believe it, and I know many of my colleagues are actually from Japan now, working in the U.S. So
very, very cool.
Yep.
So not always a diplomat. You are a diplomat now.
Yes.
Right. And how long have you been the diplomat for Maker's Mark?
I was one of the original 5 that they hired in the United States back almost 5 years ago now. Okay. And Maker's Mark being one of the priorities for our company in terms of sales, they hired us to be the marketing wing, to be the educators, to be the spokespeople for the brand around the country. And that happened about 4.5 years ago. Our Jane Bowie, who is in charge of innovation and blending at our distillery, she called me up and said, "Hey, you have any interest in coming to work just for Makers?" And if you look at our portfolio of whiskeys across our company, we have amazing whiskey: Japanese whiskey, Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey. Every category of whiskey we have it. Sure. And Makers is one of those brands that just stands out. And so it was an honor for me to even be asked to apply for the role, and I got the job, and I've been with Makers since then.
Well, that's awesome, man, and good for you, because I know Maker's Mark is not a small company by any standards. It's what I would refer to as a big-time whiskey brand. Even if you don't know enough about whiskey, you can look on a shelf, you see the red wax, and you know that that's a Maker's Mark.
Absolutely, and we have our founder, Marge Samuels, to thank for that. We can talk about her if you want, but what's crazy is I started this job almost 5 years ago. Our master distiller at the time, Greg Davis, who now oversees production at both the Jim Beam plants, said to us on his boat one night, he was laughing at us and joked about how much whiskey we had to sell. We know exactly how much we're going to sell this year. We have only so much whiskey to sell, and then this year it's going to be 2.9 million cases.
Wow.
That makes us number 3 in American whiskey, or in bourbon, not American whiskey. Jack would be number 1 if it was American whiskey.
Sure.
But Jim Beam, Evan Williams, and then Maker's Mark.
I think most people understand that it's a good solid bourbon, even at your entry level bottlings or your brands, and then when you start to work your way up to more of the cask strengths or your stave profiles that are higher proof, like you're going to have a good time. You're going to be able to share it with friends.
Yep.
It's not one of those love it or hate it type of whiskeys by any stretch, right?
Yep.
And when I think, me personally, when I think of Maker's Mark, there's 3 T's that I think of.
Mm-hmm.
The first is tradition.
Yep.
The second is transparency, and the third is taste.
I like that. I might steal that, actually.
You can take it.
Yeah.
Run with it.
Yeah.
I say tradition because Maker's Mark has stuck with the same recipe for a lot of this time, even with the stave profile, variants and the different bottlings or
Yep.
different expressions. My understanding is that the same recipe is being used, right?
We make one whiskey.
Right.
We have one mash bill, we make one whiskey, and our master distiller, Denny Potter, will tell you, making one whiskey and making it exactly the same every time is harder than making multiple mash bills and being able to combine things.
And being able to keep people's passion for it is also equally difficult, right? Because some people, they want different things almost, I don't know, weekly, monthly. Like they want to try something new, and you guys are still able to retain people's attention.
Well, you mentioned it, and what's really interesting about Makers is the quality of our whiskey has never changed. And Bill created a mash bill which was 70% corn, 16% soft red winter wheat, and 14% malted barley. Mm-hmm. That was what tasted good to him.
Sure.
And he wanted to make a whiskey that he enjoyed, and his hope was that his friends might enjoy it. I mean, he never thought it would be what it is today. Sure. But the quality of what we're doing, and yeah, we are the gateway bourbon. And 6 years ago, 5 years ago, when I started this role, it was like people didn't respect it because there were so many other new brands. But what I've seen from the whiskey connoisseurs and the whiskey nerds like myself is that the pendulum has swung back. And that what they look at is the quality of our distillate. And if you look at just the core range of Maker's Mark Classic at 90 proof, Maker's 46, which we're now calling Maker's French Oak at 94, and then of course Maker's Cask Strength, the quality of our distillate and what we're doing consistently, bottle to bottle, is something that has gained the respect of that community. Yeah. So we're not shunned anymore as just the gateway bourbon. We're actually being celebrated for the quality of what we're doing.
And you touched on the taste, so
yes.
I don't feel like I need to cover that because you did for me, so thank you. But the last 3 is transparency.
Yes.
And you also touched on the fact that the respect of the whiskey community is so important to you guys and your brand. And the reason I feel like that's the 3rd T is when I pick up a Maker's Mark, especially with those stave profile experiments,
yep.
like you know what you're getting your hands on, you know what's in the bottle. I'm not necessarily new to whiskey, but I certainly appreciate it.
And transparency is really important to me in whiskey. I've asked questions of other people at whiskey events, what's your mash bill or what is this and how do you do that? I like to be able to know what I'm drinking, and I think transparency is really important. And what I tell people is when we're at the distillery or when we're doing an event, there's nothing that I can't tell you. I mean, there's some new releases I can't really talk about that are coming down the
Sure.
pipeline, but anything we do in terms of production at the distillery, anything we do that's in a bottle, like I can tell you process, I can tell you what we do, and that's important to me because I like working for a company that I feel good about, and I certainly feel good about everything we're doing at Maker's Mark.
I have one last question. What is your favorite Maker's Mark?
Well, it's pretty. You asked me, I was like, oh yeah, I got this, no problem. My favorite pour right now is Maker's 101. Okay. I love how it stands out in cocktails. Classic can get buried in cocktails a little bit. But 101 just sings at that proof. And it's just our mash bill, so there's no wood finishing on it. It's just delicious, well-proofed, well-balanced bourbon. Cask strength's a little much for my palate. That's why I like that 101. We're coming down, about 10 points in proof from our cask strength range. And it just sings. I just love how rich it is and how delicious it is. It's my favorite. We release that a couple times a year, generally around Father's Day, and then at the holiday time of the year.
Yeah, it's not a low proof, it's not a high proof. It's a balance between the two.
Yeah.
Which might say a lot about you as a person.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Not to get all psychiatrists on you. So I did say that was my last question, but I do have an official last question.
Okay.
Will you guys, Maker's Mark, be putting out any more age statement whiskeys in the future?
There's nothing that I'm aware of at the current, time being, so I won't say never, but, I don't know what Jane and Rob and Denny are playing with down there.
Okay.
We get that request all the time. There's a lot of people I follow on social media that all they say is, I want an age-stated Makers, and I've had 12-year-old cask strength Makers, and it's delicious, but there's no plans for us to do an age statement as of now. We're just still focused on wood finishing and innovating that way, and Bill Samuels is the one that created that about 6 year. That's what our whiskey's 6 years old, basically, for all intents and purposes. It tasted right to him, and we've kind of held to that idea that Makers is great at 6 years. And this is something I'd love to talk about this because, and I'll finish it. But there's a group of people that I call the Mount Rushmore of bourbon.
Okay.
Bill Samuels is on that Mount Rushmore because he created a whiskey it tasted expensive and is. And this is in the 1950s. This is 1958, 59 when he started selling Maker's Mark. Now, there's three other gentlemen on this Mount Rushmore that I like to put there. Jimmy Russell from Wild Turkey, the Buddha of bourbon, who I've had the honor of having him pour whiskey for me at his distillery, which is really great. Booker Noe, and of course Jimmy Russell did Russell's Reserve in the 90s. Booker Noe, who created the small batch collection at Jim Beam, Creek, Bakers, Bookers, Basil Hayden. That was the first time small batch really was used as a marketing term for bourbon, which is what it is. And then of course Elmer T. Lee at Buffalo Trace when he did Blanton's in 1984. So it was 1984 with Blanton's, 1958 with Maker's Mark, 92, 93 for the Beam stuff, and then 90 around that same time period with Russell's. And those four men, I give credit for what bourbon is today, because what they created has made this amazing explosion of craft and delicious whiskey all around this country, and it's a lot of fun to be a part of it.
That concept of the Mount Rushmore of whiskey, that's something I'm going to take away from this conversation. And think about tonight about who would be on my Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
That's actually a wonderful concept. I might steal that one from you.
That's fine.
As part of a video.
We like to share as whiskey, so it's totally fine. It's totally fine. Cheers to that.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to meet you in person. This is my first time getting to meet you, and from my understanding, we're going to be trying, I think, 3 or 4 different Maker's Marks tonight.
Yep, so we're going to go through the actual tasting that you go through when you create a barrel of Maker's Mark Private Select, which is our barrel program. And so you're going to taste Maker's Cask Strength, and that's the starting point for all the whiskeys tonight. You're going to taste each one of the stave profiles and how different pieces of wood affect the whiskey. And then we're finally going to taste the 3 different stave profiles that Daniel and the leadership of the Whiskey Society came up with when we did the selection back in, I think it was November. It was a long time ago. But we're all going to taste 3 different stave profiles, and then we're going to vote. We've got a ballot, and that winner will become the barrel for the Albuquerque Whiskey Society from Maker's Mark Private Select.
Very cool. So I think my palate will be tested tonight because I'm hoping I choose the winner.
Yeah.
No promises.
No promises.
But I'm looking forward to it. And this is going to be a great event. I think many of us have been eagerly waiting for this. So I really appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you supporting the Whiskey Society, of course. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Here at Whiskey One, it's about the one you enjoy. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, folks, so we just got through interviewing David Kearns from Maker's Mark, and now I'm with Daniel Warren from the Albuquerque Whiskey Society. And from my understanding, you guys got to get together and choose different stave profiles for the whiskeys that we're about to try tonight, right?
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about those different stave mixtures?
Yeah, happy to. Back in October, we worked with Dave. I had a small group of our members come together, and we tasted the 5 different stave profiles that makers have. And from those 5 profiles, you pick out 10 different staves, and they soak those into your cask strength makers, and that becomes your special maker's barrel. So we've done that. We came up with 3 different formulas per se, and tonight we're going to be presenting those 3 different formulas to the group, and we're going to be picking one of those 3 as the barrel for Albuquerque Whiskey Society. It's going to be for sale at local stores here in Albuquerque.
Very cool, very cool. Now I'm going to take a guess. You already have a favorite.
I don't know. It's been a while since we've tasted them. They were on the bar, and I was very tempted to go drink some, but I didn't want to pour myself any. I want to be surprised as well. So we've picked them. I know there's a sweet one, there's a spicy one, and there's one that's kind of in between both. So with the Maker's staves, I know you can have over 1,000 different combinations of a formula that you can put in that barrel. So it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I know a lot of us are going to be here tonight. How many people do you think are going to be at the event?
We're going to probably have somewhere between 75 and 100 people here picking the barrel. We're at the Salt Yard on the west side here in Albuquerque, and it should be an amazing event.
I'm looking forward to it, and thanks for having us over here.
Thank you.
Here at Whiskey One, again, it's about the one you enjoy. Stay tuned.
So I want to ask the first question. Who's been in Kentucky before? All right. How many of those people have been in Kentucky moved to Vancouver? Oh, man. That's good. When were you? Well, you know when you were there. When were you there? Founder Bill Samuels and his lovely wife Martha Samuels. Those are my founders. Those two people ensured that their son and our grandson did not change anything. They made one mistake and changed one thing about 8 years ago, and we had 8 million social media comments. Being days choose what they're going to say now. Choose instead of losing. So 1, 2, 3 at the top, those are the last things we taste tonight. In third place with 17 votes, number 2. 17 votes.
It doesn't count.
The deadline are getting down to the deadline. There's Johnny's signature. I think this is he voted twice. It doesn't change anything. I'll kind of go. With second place, with that last slate vote that came in, after about 26 votes, number 3. The barrel we will be laying down number 1, which was, according to this person, yummy, but it's not like this. But, I love that. I can put this aside. So, the Albuquerque Whiskey Society is 232, 4 Bouvet, 246, and 2 French Montino.
All right.
Well done. It shows great whiskey tonight, and I hope you look forward to buying some balls. So thank you.
Happy birthday, Bob.
Thank you. All right, 1, 2, 3. Yeah.